and then we're bringing back Maria Z. But welcome everybody to this next panel, and it's an honor to speak with you all again.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
Yeah, no, thank you. I want to kick things off here with Senator Johnson, and it's an honor to have you a part of this panel. But I think one of the things that a lot of people, we've gone through several years, obviously, of like a lot of these, mRNA vaccines, injections, and all of that. And I think for a lot of people, it put a really bad taste in their mouth. Obviously, no matter whether they're super into the studying of all this or they're just an everyday person. And then all of a sudden, now we're saying, okay, now it seems like we're advancing even more with things like Stargate, and let's use mRNA for other applications in our food, in the air, to treat cancer and all of that. Is this something that, from your perspective as a legislator, should we be taking legislative steps in order to ban mRNA technology, to limit, to regulate? What's your take from your standpoint directly in the government?
Well, I think the one thing we should do is slow it all down. I was listening to previous guests. I'm hoping this isn't as bad as it may be, truthfully. My role in this, I'm not a doctor. I'm not a medical researcher. But I've obviously been involved pretty much the tip of the spear when it came to COVID. It certainly opened up my eyes to the corruption, the capture of our federal health agencies by Big Pharma. I was fortunate enough, probably late 2020, as I was certainly pushing federal health agencies and the personnel within the people like Francis Collins and others to, what are you doing in terms of exploring treatment for COVID? I thought it was insane that, the NIH's guideline was basically do nothing. Go home, hope you don't get so sick that you turn blue that you've got to subject yourself to the hospital protocols, which I truly believe. Intubating people didn't work. Once you were put on a ventilator, you probably had about 90% chance of dying. I think remdesivir certainly harmed people. We knew that. The WHO recommended against using it, but it was a patentable drug and it was a profitable drug. And so those hospital protocols put a lot of money in the hospital's pockets. I've certainly talked to attorneys who sued the hospitals where they were successful of allowing those patients to obtain some of the early treatments, whether it's ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, budesonide. I mean, a host of drugs that I think did work. I know they worked. Those patients lived where they lost the lawsuits. Those patients died. I mean, it's a pretty stark study. So again, the science has to catch up with the use of this. I was fortunate enough to talk to Michael Yeadon in late 2020 because of my advocacy for early treatment. I got connected to this group of, the medical freedom movement, people like Michael Yeadon. And again, his background, pretty impeccable. 30-year employee of Pfizer, ended up finishing his career as VP of research. His background is toxicology. When I talked to him, he was literally beside himself. He could not believe what his colleagues were doing. Again, I think mRNA may hold some real promises, but I think it's really folks should be focused on people with end-stage cancers, very limited use, not widespread use in terms of his vaccine, not now, not with what we know. But Michael Yeadon just laid it out for me. He said, Ron, that there's a long list of ingredients we don't put into injectables because they're toxic to the body. And here we're designing something. He couldn't believe his colleagues were doing this. We were designing something to turn the body into a manufacturing site for something that was toxic to it. Again, this is not a vaccine. This is an injection. It is gene therapy. It's causing your cells to produce the spike protein, which is foreign. It's not the body. And so the body attacks what's foreign to it. When the body attacks something, it inflames it. That's inflammation. That's what myocarditis is. I mean, you can understand why you have all these neurological symptoms. So again, not being a doctor, not being a medical researcher, is pretty obvious to me. This is something I didn't want to put in my body, and something that we ought to really go slow on, do a lot more testing. And then, of course, I started watching the safety surveillance systems, the VAERS systems. I started publishing, my chart that should have alarmed everybody, should have alarmed Francis Collins when I told him, asked him in a personal meeting, Are you watching VAERS? I mean, we had a few thousand deaths at that point in time. At that point, 46% of the deaths were occurring on the day of vaccination within 1 or 2 days. And his comment to me, he said, well, Senator, we've linked 6 deaths, the clotting associated with the J&J, to the vaccines, but otherwise, Senator, people die. I mean, it was that cavalier attitude that, my antenna were already raised. I mean, really started tingling my antenna in terms of these people are, they're out of control. They are not working in the best interests of public health. They're working in the best interests of pharma. So again, that was occurring in March, April of 2021, having spoken to Michael Yeadon. Of course, I was vilified when I was asked whether I got the injection. And again, that point in time, again, I'm not a doctor, not a medical researcher. I just probably took the easy route. I said, no, I mean, we don't have enough vaccine for the elderly people who want it right now. So I already had COVID. I think probably have better protection than I'd get for the vaccine anyway. So I'm not taking the vaccine, not at this point in time. And of course, I was just, smeared and vilified and ridiculed for thinking that my own natural immunity could be better than this mRNA technology. But one thing that we didn't point out well enough is that what do you think the mRNA technology relies on? What do you think any vaccine relies on? Relies on your own God-given natural immunity. And so again, all the lies told, Michael Yeadon's list, I think about 13 lies told during COVID. The fact that, they knew the mRNA would biodistribute all over the body. It wasn't going to stay in the arm. It was packaged in a lipid nanoparticle that was specifically designed to biodistribute, permeate, difficult to permeate barriers like the blood-brain, like the placental barrier. Of course, it wasn't going to stay in the arm. So again, I've probably yammered on here longer than I should, but all I know is our response to COVID, nothing made sense. The fact that we didn't explore early treatment, that we in fact sabotaged early treatment, we sabotaged drugs like hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin. We ignored our safety surveillance systems. We weren't transparent with it. You had to have ICANN. And Aaron Siri sued to get the results of the V-Safe system, which should have alarmed everybody. What, a quarter of the people were affected in some way, shape, or form, lost days of work or couldn't go to school. 8% sought medical treatment. I mean, this was not normal. We shut down the swine flu vaccine after about 400 or 500 cases of Guillain-Barré disease and a couple dozen deaths, and yet we were just watching the V-Safe, not making the results of that public. 10 million people, and of course, VAERS completely ignored VAERS, even though that was completely off the charts. So, again, I just think it's so obvious that there's something really rotten in Denmark here. Not to defame Denmark, but again, I can't come to final conclusions. I'm not going to say that mRNA has no place in medicine. It may have a wonderful place in medicine, but we certainly should slow things down. And we should take far greater caution. And I think the mRNA, the COVID injection should have been pulled to the market pretty early in 2021.
Right. Oh, yeah, for sure. Now, we're bringing on Alex Newman just to add to the panel. And Alex, I'll get to you here in just a second, but I wanted to throw a question over here to Maria, and then we'll go around to Jason as well. But specifically when it comes to like mRNA, like as Senator Johnson was saying, like maybe there is a potential for application to treat cancer or other things. And I know you mentioned in the last segment as well that Elon has said similar things where I think he specifically said on Twitter that he almost went to the hospital because of the adverse reactions to the mRNA injection for COVID. But there's a lot of promising technology applications when it comes to cancer treatment and all that. And then you see, President Trump is backing this new Stargate program with, guys like Sam Altman, where they're going to use mRNA with AI to gene edit to deal with, cancer treatment. What should our government be doing? Like, should we be pushing forward with mRNA? Should we be slowing down? Should we be stopping it altogether? What's your take on that from all of your investigations?
First and foremost, Thank you to everyone, and I have tremendous respect for you, Senator Johnson. So thank you for your time. I think that it's when we are involving people. I'm getting a bit of feedback. It started when Alex came in. I don't know if it's coming in from you, Alex. When we talk about people like Sam Altman, for example, and some of these others in the AI space, I think it's important that we understand that, like we said in the previous segment, AI and mRNA are intricately linked. And therefore, we need to be having discussions around both because they are related. When you look at some of the people that are interested in mRNA technology, these are not regular doctors, right? These are from the biotech field. There are a lot of those people surrounding the current administration. Now, I'm not going to judge their intentions, but what I will say is that if you understand the biotech field, you'll understand that this is synthetic biology. We're now talking about changing human beings. There is an ethical discussion to be had here. And when we look at some of the ethics surrounding some of these companies and AI, you can just look at a recent example where a Google chatbot, for example, responded with a threatening message to a student that was using it for an assignment or an essay, telling it to please die. We also have Facebook's artificial intelligence robots some time ago that had to be shut down because they started talking to each other in their own language. Then we have another recent example just from July of last year, where AI was of its own volition creating child sex abuse and posting it online. And then you also have Google ending a ban on AI weapons, which means that now AI is going to be used in developing weapons, and whether those are kinetic or synthetic biological weapons, we actually don't know. AI was involved in the creation of the COVID mRNA shots, and look what happened. It literally was an injection that killed and maimed arguably millions of people across the world. And so when we're talking about mRNA, we can't ignore those facts. We can't ignore the synthetic biology aspect and the dangers of AI being involved in that, considering some of these egregious examples. Like, why is AI of its own volition going and making child porn and putting it online? Who's programming it? Who are these people? Why are we entrusting them to be involved with things like Stargate if their companies have histories of really untoward behavior like this? And certainly, I would not want their AIs involved in developing medicine for me or for anyone in humanity. And then just one final point is the problem of choice. mRNA and the way in which the COVID injections were developed, and it's widely known now and reported by peer-reviewed literature that these do shed, which means that my choice, if I don't want mRNA, whether it be the COVID shot or any future mRNAs, I don't have a choice. My informed consent and my choice has been removed because I can't control whether I'm going to come into contact with a delivery driver or the person at the counter who's been injected and is going to shed on me. And an example I can give you is the recent ACAM 2000 injection, the monkeypox injection, which literally says on the package insert that it may cause death to the unvaccinated if they come into contact with someone recently injected. It's literally got that on the package insert, and that is, of course, mRNA. When we look at how many of these injections are in the pipeline, I think that really, as at a bare minimum, it needs to be paused and a complete investigation into the AI, into the companies, the biotech companies, their their characters, and removing all the guardrails of AI is a very bad idea right now. And I can talk more on that, but I want to give others some time.
Yeah, well, and Jason, I want to throw it over to you too, because I know, like, you've kind of tackled a lot of this mRNA stuff from a couple different angles. Obviously, you didn't get the COVID jab when you were in the military, and then you've kind of faced the ramifications of that from that standpoint. But then also you're taking a strong stance as well with Prepper All Naturals as well, where you're making sure there's no mRNA technology in our beef, because that's another thing that they're doing is they're putting the mRNA into our food. And in our last segment, we were talking a bit about how they're putting it into our air through their geoengineering, capabilities and all of that kind of stuff. So from your perspective, because you've kind of looked at this from a couple different angles, what should the government be doing, and what should we be doing as a culture, a society, and just, even legislation in order to, protect ourselves, put in guardrails, whatever it is? What's your take on it from that perspective?
Well, Jeff, first of all, thank you for having me on. And this is actually a very illustrious panel. I feel very out of place. So thank you to my co-panelists for being here. It is a genuine honor to be here with all of you. Jeff, I don't want to turn this into an infomercial. So the reason I'm here is not because of my company. Yes, I retired As you're aware, 3 years ago from the military, because I refused to take the COVID vaccine, I retired out of USASOC. Senator, you might be familiar with civil affairs and psychological operations, what we do, what we did under USA KPOC. Primarily, though, there's two things to take away that I would say. One is I want to touch on this before we move forward on the food issue, but Senator, you'd pointed out, I feel that everything we did was wrong. Us in the civil affairs community who've often had to respond to hotspots where there have been outbreaks of disease, we sat here on our back channels and talked about this during the entire time it was happening, during the entire response to COVID. It just so happens that the godfather to one of my children was Dr. Zev Zelenko, who at the time was also proffering the information about hydroxychloroquine and talking about how intubation was just the wrong step. It seems like all of these things they did were almost engineered, almost as though they were creating a problem that needed a solution. And what I think you're seeing with mRNA tech is an investment that's in seeking a return. And it was an investment that was failed. It was absolutely failed. And lots and lots of money was invested in this technology. And it never worked. And we even proved through the COVID shot, the injection, as the Senator pointed out, is not a vaccine, through the injection, that this was obviously designed to be something that it wasn't, never worked. And they keep throwing money at it, hoping and forgetting about whatever this Frankenstein that it's created. How this ties into food at all is the same thing. They're trying to create another problem where there isn't really a problem. The issue with food and our food supply, in most instances, has less to do with the inability for us to grow crops, the inability for us to farm animals, to do animal husbandry, to sit here and build up our inventory, either domestically or in other countries. Has very little to do with that. It has absolutely everything to do with two things. One is preservatives, and two is obviously logistics. We lose in the United States, I think, roughly 100 billion tons of food every year, just due to our inability to use logistics and save and preserve food. And when we do preserve our food, what are we putting inside of it? We're just filling it with all sorts of junk that, quite frankly, is making us ill. And I know that the administration, and I want to compliment the administration for right now tackling that issue. But unfortunately, again, it's a problem that doesn't really exist. We're culling herds. We're sitting here. We've become the number one producer of poultry in the world, and we're culling entire flocks. For what reason? For these viruses that may or may not pass, and then they create a problem that needs a solution, right? Because now we're not going to have enough food. So now we absolutely have to use this brand new mRNA technology, which is going to solve all these problems. And of course, we know that narrative hasn't stuck. Whether it be free media, whether it be the results of everyone seeing the failed COVID campaign, we know this isn't going to work. So again, they're creating this problem. And what we want to keep highlighting, and why I keep going to Washington, D.C., and Senator Johnson, now that I know I've paneled with you, I'm going to attempt to get into your office as well. But it's to sit here and create solutions that we already know exist, to be able to maintain our food reserves, to create everyone keeps saying I run a prepper company. I don't. What we do is we just preserve food without using preservatives. It's amazing, 25-year shelf life. But, we could do this and stabilize our national food supply, and that has impacts and ramifications around the world. And again, we're being fed a lie. We're being told there's a need for this technology, which there isn't. And I don't want it inside my body, and I don't want it to go. We know that they've already created a system in which to put vaccines inside of our food, in which, as Ms. Z was pointing out, and to sit here and have it shed from one person to the next. And if they can't get it that way, they're going to get it into you through your food. And we don't need to do this. Again, it's a problem that doesn't exist. It's a false problem.
Yeah, and Alex, I'm going to throw it over to you as well, because I want to get your take on this too, because it's one of those things where it's one thing to say, okay, look, private companies, whether it's pharmaceutical, biotech, whatever it is, they should be able to invest in how they want. They should be able to investigate. They should be able to develop, and as long as it's deemed as safe and effective and approved, although hopefully now with RFK Jr. in there, at least now it's actually going to be legitimately safe and effective, as opposed to before where it's getting rammed through. But I think one of the hard parts about this is, one thing if you're just leaving it to these private entities and private corporations, but it's another when we're seeing the alignment of the government in different forms, different agencies aligning with these private companies in order to push this through. What's your take on that? Because I know you've really studied this and investigated this a lot from that perspective.
Well, thank you very much, Jeff. It's an honor to be here. And
Hey,
really a free
Alex,
market kind of
you're
guy.
coming in really like almost like distorted. I wonder maybe hop out and hop back
Oh.
in, and then I'll get back to you. So, Senator Johnson, let me throw it over to you, and then I'll get back to Alex when it comes back. But what's your let's see, let's see, Alex, is that better?
I don't know. Do you hear me well?
Yep, you're coming in great. Okay, you can go ahead and take the question then.
Perfect. Well, thank you. And I'm really a free market kind of guy. I do believe that the government should, generally speaking, keep its hands off of private actors, private citizens, private companies. But what has happened here is really a fascistic kind of partnership between big government and allegedly private actors. And I think there's a lot of dangers with that. I mean, we don't necessarily need to even look at the extreme examples like fascism in Italy and Germany to recognize that a partnership between a government and a corporation, especially when it involves mandates and our health and things like that, can result in some very serious problems. And one of the things that I've noticed is that thanks to the lobbying efforts going back many decades, we have a system of incentives in place now that actually incentivizes things that would not take place in a free market system. I know a lot of people get uncomfortable even talking about the genetic engineering, but it's a perfect example, in my opinion. When U.S. patent authorities said that you could patent novel DNA, that opened up the floodgates to all kinds of research that I really don't think ought to be happening and that would not be happening without active government intervention in the marketplace. And I'm not an anti-intellectual property. I think intellectual property is critical for driving innovation, for improving the economy, for improving the welfare of humanity. But when you're talking about manipulating DNA of living organisms, so you're just looking at this from a Christian perspective, God is the one who wrote our genetic code. Do we really want man manipulating that? And do we really want to put government incentives in place that not only encourage that, but in some cases now have almost made it necessary for certain sectors and industries, including, by the way, the agricultural sector that's supposed to be feeding us, to participate in this? I think it's a very, very dangerous thing. And then to bring it up to these mRNA injections, we're dealing with the same issue again. The government has put in place incentives that made this possible, where if we had a free market and the government had not created these incentives, had not allowed these incentives to emerge, we wouldn't even be having this discussion, because this research would probably not be happening, certainly not at the scale that it's happening at. And as a person who believes in individual liberty, if you want to take some weird injection, if you want to manipulate your genetic code, it's not my place to tell you not to do that. I think it's a dumb idea. You better not do it to any children. But hey, you're a free human being. You have the right to decide for your body what you think is right for you. And I believe that ought to be the approach of the government. But we've got to focus in on these incentive structures. And another really clear example of this was the 1986 act by Congress that gave immunity to the vaccine manufacturers. That is insane. Why would we do that? I mean, do we want bad and dangerous products? And we're just talking about basic free market guardrails here. If you sell a product that hurts people knowingly, you ought to be held accountable in a court of law. We don't need big government to intervene here. All we need is basic free market systems like an honest judiciary and an honest tort system to be able to hold these players accountable ourselves. So I kind of conversely, a lot of this stuff gets blamed on capitalism. I'd say, no, we're not dealing with capitalism here. We're not dealing with free markets. We're dealing with incentive structures that were put into place by big government in partnership with big business. And that's not even to discuss, In-Q-Tel, for example, the investment arm of the intelligence community, some of the things that DARPA is involved in. When you look behind the scenes at what the intelligence agencies have been doing, what the bio warfare teams have been doing, you recognize so many of these problems that we're dealing with are actually directly traceable to government intervention, in many cases unconstitutional government intervention, that if our federal government was obeying the Constitution, these things wouldn't even be happening. So very simple answer here. If people want to explore AI, sure. If people want to do mRNA research, sure. We need proper protections in place like tort law so that if something goes wrong, you can sue them. We don't want government subsidies. We certainly don't want government mandates. And we don't want to create an incentive structure where we're incentivizing companies to hurt people or do research that really ought not be done and wouldn't be done in a free market.
Yeah, no, it's a great point, and to kind of piggyback off of that, and I'll throw it over to you, Senator Johnson. But it's one of those things where I think we've seen this kind of interweaving of big government with big corporations, and I think as conservatives, a lot of times, we always talk about limiting government, make government smaller, make it more effective, just focus on preserving our rights and national security and all of that. But then it seems like then a lot of times, what the legislation that's passed, the laws that are passed, all of that, it tends to benefit, one particular entity or one particular industry, or it will benefit the big corporations. Maybe a lot of times the smaller ones will get affected. We saw that with COVID and the lockdowns and all of that. We see that with certain, talk about, regulating, social media platforms or, pharmaceutical companies and things like that. Is there a way to separate private business from government from a legislative standpoint from your perspective? Or is it just so interwoven that there's not really an opportunity to make that happen?
Well, first of all, it's getting more and more difficult. Let's just step back.
Yeah.
Science has progressed to a point where science can literally cause an extinction event. That started with the splitting of the atom. Nuclear power is a wonderful thing, but a nuclear holocaust could wipe out the planet. Now you have CRISPR technology, you have gene editing, you have GMO seeds, and we're always told, well, these are the exact same thing. Well, they're not. What is causing these things, and what has happened in the intervening time when science progressed to the point where it literally could cause the extinction of the human race? Government has grown to the point, become so powerful that it is captured by industry. So the system we have set up, in theory, is the type of system you need to protect the public. You need some entity looking at these things from a macro view and saying, hang on, we need to slow this thing down. We need to use the power of government to stop certain things like gain of function. The development of nuclear weapons in private hands. I mean, these types of things, but government's not capable of doing it. They're totally incapable. And, Eisenhower warned us in his farewell address, very famous for the military industrial complex, but his second warning was he warned about public funding of science and research. It would create a scientific and technological elite that drive public policy. And I would argue that it has corrupted science. So what we are seeing now is science has been corrupted. The very agencies that should be relying on science has corrupted science. When Anthony Fauci is, letting out tens of billions of dollars worth of grants, Anthony Fauci gets the result he wants. When you pay for science, you get the result you want. We've seen that time and time again. There's all kinds of examples of this. I won't waste time quoting them right now, but science is corrupted and the agencies have been captured. So that's really what's on the table right now. So I think what Bobby Kennedy certainly understands, that the first thing we need to do is we need to uncorrupt science. We got to return integrity to it. Again, I know a lot of people on this call have come to conclusions. I mean, that's great. That's your, you have every right to do it. But from my standpoint, I want everybody, as Bobby Kennedy now is looking at the obvious, something has gone wrong to have chronic illness be at such a level that it's at, that to have autism be exploding the way something has gone wrong. I held that panel with Bobby and Dr. Casey Means and these nutritionists. I think the best snippet of testimony from that event came from Dr. Chris Palmer, a psychiatrist, been looking at nutrition's impact on mental health. He said they don't want to know the root cause of these things. Again, that is a profound statement, and it is true. I mean, what Europe does, they have government in place to regulate what ingredients go into our food. So they have 400 approved ingredients. We have generally recognized as safe. So we have 10,000 ingredients. Obviously not as rigorous a regulatory environment to make sure that what's going to our food is safe. But again, I don't just want a government agency dictating what these things are. I want everybody at the table. So I think it's setting up a system where science again is rigorous. That peer review is completely corrupt. Again, there's nothing that guarantees, just because you have peers, whoever those peers are, who do it on a voluntary basis. Sometimes they're going and they're trying to sabotage a really good study, but it's counter to what their commercial interests are. So again, the root cause right now is science has been corrupted. We need to uncorrupt it. We need to return integrity to it. And we need to end the corporate capture of our federal government, because I don't know any other entity. Now, in the industry, you have things like ISO certification, private sector policing private sector. A model like that might work, but you'll still need some governing authority. And as much as I'm not a fan of government, trust me, okay? I don't know what other authority could really govern this. I mean, we're talking about organic food. Anybody here think organic food is great?
Well, is it really organic?
No, I mean, so it's you take a look at everything on the shelf, but it's all got seed oil in it. Is seed oil a real problem? Again, it's certainly high on the suspect list. So again, the problem what I bring to the table is I'm a layman who's ignorant about all these things, right? So I ask all these questions, but as lay people, we are just in a world of hurt because we don't know who to believe. You literally don't know who to believe because all this has been so corrupted. So I'm not providing any answers here. I'm sorry. I've just got a ton of questions, but that's been the problem. We haven't been allowed to even ask the questions on autism, on chronic illness. I mean, right now I'm listening to Bayer on iHeartRadio pushing the benefits of glyphosate. And there's no doubt about it. Glyphosate has allowed us to increase crop yields, I believe. I've heard people with contrary view of that as well. But they're going to be pushing that while we've got other people saying, no, this is poisoning our food. This is what's causing, all kinds of intolerance, autoimmune, I don't know. All I know is the system's been corrupted. And that's the main thing we have to do is restore integrity, first of all, to our federal agencies who have to govern this, and restore integrity to science.
Yeah, Jason, I'll throw it over to you because I know you're kind of raising your hand.
I'll only take a second because it looks like Maria has something also to throw in there. But Senator, you just pointed out something and used the word organic, and I'm just going to say from my side of the field, when you look at from our viewpoint, they go, if you're going to present a product as organic, this is what the rules are. It sounds fine and dandy. It sounds like this should be something that's farm to table. It takes place and it's basically the elimination of factory farming. And then you look into the details and realize that somebody has gone in, some mega corporation, some food company has gone in and changed the rules and written it in so that, no, it's not actually have to be, from the time it's born until the time it hits the table. No, it has to spend 3 months walking around a pasture somewhere, and then it can get certified organic. It's the same thing when we talk about food. There's a lot of food traveling around the United States that is USDA certified because, sure, it was frozen and sat on a dock somewhere, but it might have come from Australia. It might have come from China. But it's loopholes written in so that when it is presented, people, they don't know where their food is coming from. They don't know what's inside of their food. They don't even know what the word organic even means. And part of this is it's not a legislative loophole. It was written specifically to benefit people, because if you really had looked at what organic food is, what it costs to produce, and other, it would actually cost twice as much as what we would consider to be factory farm food. But what they are able to do is skirt these loopholes and then turn around and undercut everyone, making massive profits and sending a lot of it overseas, quite frankly. Sorry,
let me quick jump in here, and that's where government will not be relied on to fix this. This is where I think the private sector, we need something called real organic. And I think you need to establish companies that, people being certified them, they're going to be putting a lot of pressure through the private sector to make sure that the certifications are real. And I think that's what we do with ISO certification. You have a number of ISO certifiers out there. They can't be schluck because it costs a lot of money. It takes a lot of time and effort to maintain your ISO certification. The same thing should be true in terms of organic. So I really look in terms of the organic label. I think it has been thoroughly corrupted. I don't have any great faith that, this is, because again, I've seen the stories or, what feed comes in from China that, into organic food.
Yes, sir.
So we need to recapture that. Again, I think there's still plenty, there's probably good organic, and I think there are, firms that have integrity, but that has to be rethought and uncorrupted as well.
Yeah. Well, and I'm going to throw it over to you, Maria, but I think to kind of piggyback off of that as well, I think with a lot of this, a lot of the concerns that I think a lot of us have, it's not that there are certain practices that are in place or certain companies that are doing certain things, but it's that a lot of times, and I think this is what was being spoken about during the last panel as well, a lot of times we're not able to consent to it as a private individual citizen of the United States of America. So like if they're doing gene editing, right, and they're spraying toxic chemicals into the sky to generate more rain, like they do out here in the state of California with cloud seeding, where they use things like silver iodide, which is harmful to biological life, and different things. Like, I can't consent to the fact that I'm being exposed to that toxic chemical. And the same thing would go for things like pesticides, things like all these different kinds of practices that are happening where, I'm being led to believe that this is organic or this is clean. But then I talk to a regenerative organic farmer who literally says, well, I can't stop the fact that, from 3 farms over, they're spraying all these pesticides all over the crops. And then it's coming over into our fields and we're not spraying, but you're still getting exposed to it because other farms are doing it. And that's where it's kind of like, I think, and I'll throw this to you, Maria, but is there a way that we can actually protect the individual rights and our individual ability to make some of these decisions? Or is it just so convoluted and so chaotic that there's not really a way to protect our individual rights?
Unfortunately, I don't have control over the air that I breathe and what people put in it. And that's the problem that we have. Just like the perfect example that you just gave of those farmers who don't have control over what people are spraying 4 farms away. And so we had a very interesting statement from President Donald Trump the other day talking about, we're going to look at whether some things that we're spraying are making us sick. We had Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who I think is a phenomenal individual, and I'm actually very happy he's just pulled the plug on Biden's oral COVID vaccine experiment. He's actually put a pause on it and says he wants to look into the safety first, which is what should happen with every injection. He's not banning it, but he wants to review the safety first, and someone like him, I think, will. And so I'm very encouraged to see these things. This is the same person that promised during the campaign trail that we're going to stop the crime of geoengineering. And it is a crime. And it's not just that it's affecting our weather systems, but it's also affecting our health because of some of the toxic things that you described, Jeff. And I believe that our outlet is the only one that's actually got the full library of the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration's geoengineering projects all over America, the stuff that they're spraying, and it's on record. Their according to their own library, is literally carcinogenic, toxic. So none of us really have a choice over that, Jeff. So in instances like this is where we do need government intervention. And just quickly circling back to the examples I gave before of AI doing extremely unethical things and its involvement in future mRNA. I'm not saying that all technology, we just need to stop technology. I'm certainly not saying that. We have an example with a company called Anthropic, for example, which has an LLM called Claude. Now, that particular LLM can't do things unless it's given permission. It would never tell a student, like Google's AI did, to go and kill itself. It would never create child pornography of its own volition, right? So what I'm trying to say is we do need to have progress, and I'm not against progress, but we certainly can't remove all regulation, especially in such an unknown technology where AI is very powerful and growing more powerful every day. We're getting more data centers. I think that this will be really great for the whole world. It can give us, phenomenal advances. But I also see the dangers in this, where we have potentially, the NOAA, as an example, said that by 2025, their omics strategy was to upload all geoengineering projects into the cloud so that their AI would be able to essentially determine what geoengineering do we need to do next. So that's what that AI is being used for. I don't think that that's safe. I don't think it's safe to continue spraying carcinogenic chemicals into the air. And it certainly isn't the void is that people they're devoid of choice, and this is the problem. So I think, again, we just have to be more informed on these things, understand the dangers, and understand that, yes, while we're not against progress and there may be positive things in the future, what RFK Jr. just did with putting a pause on this and saying we need to review the safety is the way forward. That comes with mRNA, AI, geoengineering projects, all of it. We have to review safety before just blindly saying, well, seems okay, seems to check all the boxes. It is 3 years down the track that we have confirmation that Pfizer's injections are shedding onto everyone. It took 3 years for us to find that out. How much could go wrong in 3 years if we give AI more control over medicine? Those are my concerns, Jeff.
Yeah, definitely. Well, it's really interesting because there was an old ABC show called Once Upon a Time where they took all the old Disney movies and put it into a TV series form. And Rumpelstiltskin was this one character, and what he would do is every single time he would say, basically you can do magic, right? But magic always comes at a price. And I feel like that's kind of what we're dealing with all of this. There's a lot of potential when it comes to artificial intelligence and transhuman. Like, there's a lot of potential positive applications, but then it comes down to at what cost. And I think that can be applied to mRNA, can be applied to AI, can be applied to geoengineering, all these different kinds of things. And I think, from your perspective, Alex, like it is the positives, does that outweigh the negatives? Because I think that that's the way that I think our society kind of looks at things is, are there too many negatives that would outweigh the positives, or vice versa?
Well, I think whether there are too many negatives or too many or more positives, I think at some point is going to become irrelevant, because some of these technologies actually have massive military applications. So, for example, if you were to try to shut down artificial intelligence in the United States, that would leave communist China, that would leave Russians, that would leave others in complete control of the field, which would be absolutely catastrophic. It would result, I think, almost inevitably in a military defeat for the United States in any kind of war that might break out. So we need to recognize that these technologies are like, I think, all other technologies. In the right hands, for the right purposes, they can do great things for humanity. And I very much believe that about AI. AI could do wonderful things for humanity. And I think, to simplify, just think of a firearm. A firearm can be an incredible tool for good. You can protect innocent women and children from a deranged bear, or from a rapist, or from a mass murderer. Or that same firearm in the hands of a mass murderer can be an incredible tool for destruction. So government and law enforcement do have an important role to play here. If somebody is developing a technology for the purpose of hurting somebody, for the purpose of doing something evil, they must be punished. They must be stopped. But we need to allow some of these technologies to develop, I think, in a free market without distorted government interventions. Obviously, we want to make sure, as Senator Johnson pointed out, that we don't develop something, or somebody develops something that inadvertently exterminates humanity or destroys the planet. Those things are very, very important. And that's, I think, one of the main functions of government. But we don't want to come in and just destroy the market and punish the entrepreneurs and allow, say, the communist Chinese to dominate these really, really critical technology fields.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. And Senator Johnson, I want to kind of, leave you with the last word as well with all of this, because I think, from your perspective, obviously as a legislator, right? So you're working through a lot of these kinds of things when it comes to, proposed bills. How do we actually put these safeguards or regulations, or, figure out how do we separate the government out from these private entities or not, and the application of all this. But for a lot of people, they are concerned about, obviously, mRNA technology being applied in every which way. And so it's like, so then what's our takeaway from all of this when we look at this, where we see, okay, Stargate's coming out, they're pushing mRNA to combat cancer. But if they start applying that in some ways, are we going to have shedding in the same way that we would with the COVID jabs? Is there a way to protect ourselves from that happening? And having some sort of legal protection from that standpoint. So what's your kind of takeaway from just this conversation? I'll kind of let you have the final word on all this.
Well, it's difficult, it's complex.
Yeah.
Like I say, I'm not a real fan of the federal government. I'm not a real fan of Congress, quite honestly. We'd probably be better off if we never wrote another law. We do far more harm than good. We ought to be taking the Hippocratic oath. But again, that being said, somebody's got to be looking at this. And from my standpoint, the most critical factor, if we're going to restore integrity of science, you need everybody at the table. It's the independent review boards. People can't have conflicts of interest. I don't want the people at these review boards coming from one side of the issue. I want all sides being represented. These are not easy issues. From my standpoint, AI, I think the worst thing you can do is try and regulate it. I think what you need a lot of different AIs so that not one becomes dominant. But again, even the people developing AI say, it's 10% chance of exterminating the human race. I mean, there is real danger with AI. There's no doubt about it. There's real danger with CRISPR technology and gain of function research and all these types of things. There's real danger with, obviously, nuclear proliferation. So we're living in a world where we have science that can destroy the human race, and you need some governing authority to try and police that, but it's got to be as open and transparent as possible, and everybody has to be at the table. I mean, that's my main point. There's nothing simple about this. It's incredibly complex. There's no easy solution, but we need the involvement of really smart people from all sides of the issue when you're taking a look at science.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, definitely. Well, I appreciate each of you guys being a part of this summit and being a part of this panel as well. Senator Johnson, Maria Z, Jason Nelson, Alex. We're going to keep you on for the next panel as well. But I appreciate each of you guys being a part of this and lending your expertise. And let's go around the horn. Maria, where's the best place for people to find you and tune into your show and all of your amazing interviews and all that?
Absolutely. You can find me at @ZEEE_media on X. I also work with Vigilant Fox weekly show called Media Blackout, which goes out on X. And all of our work is posted on ZEEEmedia.com.
And Jason, you as well?
You can always find me on X at Real Jason Nelson. And since I have nothing to promote, I'm just going to say this: Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Okay. Oxygen, water, food. That's the third thing on there, folks. So when they control the food supply, they control you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And Alex, best place for people to find you and tune into you host a whole bunch of shows.
I do, yeah. So most of it you can find at libertysentinel.org and also thenewamerican.com.
Perfect. Sounds good. Thank you, everybody. And then we're going to go ahead and we'll transition into our final panel here in just one second. But I just kind of want to summarize with all of this is I think just as we're moving forward, like Senator Johnson said, it's a very complex issue to deal with more from a legislative perspective. And so I get, maybe we need to show a little bit of grace, but also we do need to make sure that we are holding our elected officials accountable, that they are protecting our individual rights and our constitutional rights, and ensuring that we're not being inundated with all these toxins and chemicals and AI being weaponized against us and transhumanism against our consent. And I think that's one of the big concerns that I have dealing with mRNA technology specifically moving into the future is, do I have the ability to consent to being exposed to this kind of a thing if my neighbor or friend or family member also gets this injected? Somebody who's going in for cancer treatment, if they're gonna use mRNA in order to treat them for cancer, okay, that's great. But let's make sure that it doesn't shed onto somebody else who doesn't consent to being exposed to that. So I think that's one of those things. So we're going to go ahead. We're going to move on to our final panel here in just 1 minute. But I do want to remind everybody to go over to pickaxe.com. There's a QR code that's up here on the screen as well. You guys can just scan that, go over there, set up your guys' account over there at pickaxe.com, because this is what we're doing. We're setting up there. And this is another big reason why we're having this summit as well. So we're trying to have conversations about things that maybe we can't fully flesh out and deal with on other platforms. It's like, yes, we could deal with the COVID stuff on X, but we're also challenging the very technology and the very ideology behind a lot of what they're developing with X, with XAI, with Grok, with Neuralink, with all these different kinds of technologies. And so what we want to do is we're trying to create a space for humanity, for your individual voice to be heard, and we can have more of these kinds of conversations. So we're going to be using technology in order to facilitate that, as opposed to the other platforms which are actually using you and your data in order to build up their technology. So that's what we're doing. You guys can sign up over at pickaxe.com. We are live. We're web-based only. We're going to be rolling out an app here in the next couple of months, but we've got an amazing lineup of people that are on the platform, including the entire next panel as well, that you guys can all follow on pickaxe.com. So again, pickaxe.com, follow the QR code. It'll take you guys right over there. But for this final panel, before we bring on my interview with Nicole Shanahan, we're going to go ahead and we've got all good friends. We're bringing back Alex Newman. We've got Nate Kane, and we've got Karen Kingston coming back. But thanks to each of you guys for sticking with us. And again, it's a long day, long summit, but a lot of really interesting, fascinating conversations. But we'll kick things off. I'm going to throw it over to you, Nate, because one of the things that I think there was kind of a lot of shock that happened among a lot of the people in the MAHA movement, even the MAGA movement as well, which is when Donald Trump stood up there with Sam Altman and the whole gang rolling out Stargate, where they're talking about, okay, we're going to roll out mRNA with artificial intelligence to combat cancer. And we're all just sitting here. We're like, did we not learn our mistake from last time when we're dealing with mRNA with combating COVID? Like, what's the difference here? Why are we doing this? So from your perspective, like, and obviously you've got a huge, extensive experience when it comes to, cybersecurity and technology and all of that. What was your kind of takeaway from that announcement when it came to Stargate?
Well, I'm not surprised. I mean, I think that we are looking at to basically repeat something that Alex had said in the previous section. We have to keep up on all of these technological advancements because we have adversaries out there that are going to charge ahead. And so it becomes a matter of whether or not we are going to be good stewards of this technology, and are we going to put into place the proper safeguards and ethics so that we can deploy these technologies to be used in an appropriate way. I'm less concerned about whether or not we move forward with these technologies. I think that's a must. And more or less what I'm concerned about is how are we going to do it? Is it going to be transparent? Are there going to be things like feedback loops in order to ensure that you have a self-balancing system so that it doesn't get out of control? Those are things that I get worried about and concerned about. My background is in cybersecurity and risk management. So I've done this for 27 years, and I've looked at IT systems, a lot of weapon systems, things like that. I've been involved in some projects that have also worked to integrate AI into weapon systems and things like that, which when you hear those two terms put together, right, you immediately think of, Skynet, as nobody's seen, the Terminator. But the reality is that it is as Senator Ron Johnson was saying in the previous section, it's very complicated. There is a very important regulatory piece to this that has to happen, needs to be in place. But they're going to get hit from everybody on all sides of the equation. And in some cases, the people who are going to have the most influence may be the ones with the most money, and that may not be in the public's best interest. So, one of the things that I've advocated for in all of these systems is we know that technology is going to get developed. It's going to be advanced. How do we ensure that we can use some of these same tools of AI and things like that to basically monitor this development as it's going forward, to look for, signs and flags and red flags and warnings that it's getting out of control, or that it's not being it's no longer abiding by whatever safeguards or ethics standards that we put in place. And I think that really has to be the key. And I'm a big advocate for the Second Amendment. And and the fact is that we oftentimes consider the Second Amendment as basically guns, but it's much bigger than that. And I think when we look at things like intelligence systems and the possibility of the government spying on us and other types of things, or the possibility of a corporation taking advantage to essentially develop something that has a financial incentive to keep you sick so that they can keep giving you drugs. Those types of things, we should be developing tools that look for those types of red flags. And I think it's perfectly, advisable and fair. And I think the government should encourage this sort of thing. But I think there need to be systems put into place so that the public has awareness of what's going on and can ultimately act to stop this sort of thing. The biggest threat that I see right now with all of these technologies that you've talked about in the last several sections has been the lack of informed consent on everything. All of this stuff is moving so fast. We don't know what's being put into our food. We don't know what is being, put into the air. We don't know what's being put into our water supply. And we're just finding out now, that we've been having things put into our water supply and into our food for a very long time that has been making us sick. And the reason why that was able to happen was because there were no feedback loops. There was nothing coming back and saying, hey, we're beginning to see a trend here that doesn't look right. It's time to put a pause on this and stop it and investigate.
Yeah, well, and I think to kind of piggyback off of that though, and also transition a little bit, but I think a lot of that though is because there, in a lot of circumstances there weren't those feedback loops, but it was intentionally, right? And I think that that's the concern that I think a lot of us have when it comes to the further development of these kinds of technologies. Whether you're talking about Stargate or Neuralink or anything, is that okay? But we still haven't fixed the root-based problem, which is a corrupt health agency. We haven't fixed the corrupt CIA and the FBI and all of that. And Alex,
Correct.
I want to throw this over to you too, to talk about this a little bit. But it's like, do we have the infrastructure in place in order to regulate and do what Nate was saying, which I would in general agree with, but I just don't know if we have the infrastructure in place in order to facilitate that.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff, and thanks, Nate, for the insight there. I do not think we have that infrastructure in place. In fact, I don't think you can understand what happened to us during COVID without understanding exactly what Senator Johnson just said. First of all, that the institutions that are supposed to be providing oversight to all this madness have been totally captured by the evildoers that are currently working to use these tools, use these technologies against humanity, against human liberty, against the middle class in the United States. So we're in a very, very dangerous situation here, because the institutions that we thought we created to protect us from the very kinds of things that we're talking about, not only are not protecting us, they actually have been turned against us in a very real way. They've given a seal of approval to things that are absolutely dangerous, if not deadly. And they have also downplayed and hidden, in many cases, worked with others to hide the dangers, like we saw during COVID with the suppression of everybody's free speech on YouTube and the social media, with the White House leaning on the big tech companies. So you have a very, very dangerous situation here. Now, I think we do need those institutions, but unfortunately, the current ones that we have been totally captured by the very people that they're supposed to be protecting us against.
Yeah, no, it's a great point, and I want to throw it over to you, Karen, because I think you and I, it's funny. You and I always joke that every time we talk on the phone, we should just record it and release it as a podcast.
Yeah.
But I think, starting with that preface of what we're just talking about with Alex and Nate, of just understanding it's like we should have these certain kinds of safeguards and feedback loops and all that, but also we don't have the infrastructure in place. And I would argue that these agencies are all corrupted to the point to where we can't trust them, even if we did have those feedback loops. But then to throw it over to you as well, with a lot of your understanding, is now we've got Elon Musk developing and rolling out Neuralink, which is basically with the ultimate goal of what he says is super intelligence, where it's a brain chip implanted into your skull that basically connects your brain to the internet. And he also admitted on Joe Rogan's podcast that it would have the ability to erase memories and replace them with new ones. So that's concerning. And then you've got Stargate, which is combining AI with mRNA technology in your body. From everything I can tell, it seems like they'd be connecting your body to the internet through this technology and all of that. So from your perspective as a biotech analyst, it's like, okay, so we don't have all of that in place, but then even just from the health perspective, and then also from the control perspective from the government, how do we maneuver these things? Is it even something that we should be entertaining?
Well, in defense of the federal employees, I don't think the entire government is corrupt. I think there are good, hardworking employees, just like there is at any organization, just like there is at any church. But the more power you get, the more likely you're to be corrupted. And I think the leadership is corrupt, just in defense of that. Yep. In regards to Neuralink, Neuralink is a very outdated technology. Make no mistake, Neuralink was approved. It was called BlackRock Neurotech in 2008. So Elon Musk, what he did was he put an application for Neuralink, saying that it was a new technology, which is why he was getting pushback from the FDA, even though the technology is over 10 years old. What he really wants is Neuralase, which can be delivered via an injection, aerosol, or a pill, which is using the synthetic nanobiotechnologies to cross the blood-brain barrier and build neural networks. That's really what this is about. They're just not disclosing that to us right now. And that's really where the neural technology is going. As Klaus Schwab said in 2000 in the World Economic Forum, the fourth industrial revolution doesn't change what you're doing, it changes who you are. So that would have to also hijack your cognitive function. So we are being disclosed information that is over a decade old, and those are the things that we're debating right now. And that's actually very, very concerning to me. And in regards to, I obviously, hi, Alex, it's great to see you. I do think, yes, we need to keep up with China when it comes to AI in certain ways, but not in other ways. For example, ARK Investment has a portfolio of products in the AI technology industry. It's the CEO and CTO or CIO is Kathy Wood. They just put up their recommendations. It's like a 114-page presentation, and I went through it, and there's a large section dedicated to China. And there is the autonomous vehicles, there are the autonomous robots, and she's predicting that by the end of this year, autonomous vehicles and autonomous robots will be a huge market in the United States. Why? Well, we have to keep up with China, and I think that is insane. Because and they're launching, and Tesla's launching in June of this year, the autonomous vehicles. Because I just remember 4 years ago, the U.S. military saying AI autonomous vehicles and robots, could be weapons of mass destruction. And I know there has to do with a kill switch. Now, Elon Musk is saying, hey, my autonomous vehicles can drive your kids around and my robots can babysit them. This is insanity. And as Nate said, the Second Amendment is far more than just having a gun. Good luck shooting an autonomous robot.
Exactly.
So this is, as I wrote a Substack on this, are we in a race with China for AI, or are we in an AI takeover from China? And I think that there's a lot of things in the dark, and I think all of us on this panel, we're taking huge risks just talking about them. And I think that the state of America is actually, when you talk about the First Amendment, I mean, we really are not in a great state where you have to be fearful about questioning King Elon.
Yeah. No, it's a good point. Nate, what's your thought on what both Karen and Alex were saying? Again, with your experience and in your background.
So what Karen was just talking about, I think, is extremely important for people to understand. It's not a matter of an arms race. We're talking about, for one, we are concerned about our government abusing its power. We saw this happen with the intelligence community tools that have been used to spy on Americans that were never meant to be used on American citizens. We've seen that. That's a fact. But it's not just the government we got to worry about. It's corporations that many are multinational corporations, have zero allegiance to the United States. So that is another problem, and it's a separate problem, but it's something that has to be considered in all of this. And what really there needs to be, I believe, third-party audits being done by vetted citizens that can in fact look into this stuff. And there needs to be transparency, absolute transparency on a lot of this type of technology, because it's being kept from the public, and people don't know what's going on until it's too late. And you have stuff going on right now. The reason I brought up informed consent, because that is like your most basic human right. And if there's no consequences for somebody violating that right, then what's going to stop them? I mean, look, we put people to death after World War II, with the Nuremberg Code, for violating people's rights to informed consent. Why is that not option on the table for dealing with some of these corporations and government officials who don't seem to care about human rights? And I think that's something that would be a very big deterrent, I think, for people abusing their authority or abusing their power. And I think it's something we have to consider. And to the point of what Karen was saying about, and what I brought up about the Second Amendment, I think the citizens need to have tools to combat technocratic tyranny, if you will. Some of that is ensuring that we have platforms like yours, to be able to talk about these things. But here's the problem. Let's say that your platform is working great and people are on it, but all of a sudden the banking industry as a whole that's captured decides they're not going to allow for any payment processing, we saw this happen. Yeah. We saw this happen where you had Bank of America. That should never be allowed. And that is where we need government regulators to step in to stop that sort of thing. Censorship, mass censorship, should never be allowed, especially the government being involved in it. But not just the government. When you have a cartel of massive multinational corporations working together to silence, look, regardless of what somebody may think about Alex Jones, what they did to him was absolutely tyrannical. They shut him down in every single way possible, went after him with lawfare, totally destroyed, tried to attempt to destroy this man. And it was clearly a coordinated effort by multiple multinational corporations and the government That in and of itself should worry every American citizen, because if they can do it to him, who had arguably one of the largest, audiences on YouTube, they could do it to any of us. And so those are things that we should be concerned about. And I think there need to be severe consequences for violations of those rights.
Yeah. No, I 100% agree, and that's one of those things I'm thinking through constantly when it comes to Pickaxe on our social media platform is like, what are the different things, like, are we gonna have to develop our own alternatives, like what's going to be the workarounds if we come into dealing with these different kinds of forms of censorship, like you said, whether it's debanking or whatever it is. So those are thoughts that are going through my mind all day every day. But Alex, I kind of want to throw it over to you because I want to kind of bring this conversation back, and I think it'll segue perfectly back to Karen as well. Of Donald Trump, day number 2, obviously came out with Sam Altman and Larry Ellison and all these guys with Stargate, right? And Trump is basically wants to help to be able to facilitate the infrastructure, the server, basically the entire infrastructure in order to fast track this thing. What should people be concerned with this, and why, from your perspective?
Well, I think people should absolutely be concerned about it. I think what happened, and when I saw that press conference, I actually reached out to a variety of different sources to try to figure out what was going on. And I was told that Trump was told that we have to do stuff like this if we're going to keep up with the communist Chinese. And so we need to be careful that we don't, and I do believe that that is true. I don't believe that the government has to do these things, but I do believe we not only must keep up with the communist Chinese, we must stay ahead of them and all other potential evil actors that might want to use these very advanced technologies to destroy our freedom. And that includes, by the way, many of the folks here domestically. I think Donald Trump was sold this idea based on the idea that America has to remain the preeminent leader in technology. Now, we have always been the preeminent leader in technology, at least for recent memory, because we have had a very robust free market system. And I don't believe we need federal partnerships with AI programs to remain the leader. And I think it also introduces a dangerous incentive too. When you have these kinds of technologies developing in the marketplace, generally speaking, there's a profit motive. And generally speaking, if you're pursuing profit, unless you have a corrupt government that is handing out goods and services and favors and corrupt deals, people are going to be searching for ways to serve their fellow human being. How do we bring things to market that are going to make people's lives easier? How do we solve people's problems? So those natural incentives that you find in a free market are really, really helpful. If people want to build data centers, great. If people want to create AI AI is just a glorified computer program. If people want to write cool computer programs that help solve people's problems, why should we be opposed to that? The problem is when you bring in the fascistic element here, which is the government partnership, then you start introducing other agendas. It's not just about making money by solving problems for people, making better goods and services at lower prices with better variety. Then it's about how do we take away people's freedom? How do we extort people for money? And if you look at the AI systems that are being developed in communist China, that's always the point. Yeah, there may be some superfluous consumer applications for these things, but even the companies that are developing these technologies, they're extensions of the government. We don't want to become like China in this country, where our companies that are doing the research are just extensions of the government. But that's what's happening. We're watching the Chinification of the United States and the world, because as George Soros has told us, communist China should own the new world order. As Klaus Schwab has told us, communist China is a role model for many countries. But these people are absolutely insane. I was going to say a word that I don't want to use here, but they're bat poop crazy. Okay, this stuff is absolutely bonkers. So these technologies are here. They're going to keep developing. They're very dangerous. They're very, very dangerous. And so we need a free press. We need free speech. I mean, we saw the danger of this with COVID. If we don't have a free press, if we don't have the ability to sound the alarm, if we don't have strong protections for whistleblowers who are working in these companies and might see like, hey, there's some crazy guy working in this company who's thinking about using this to take over some weapon system and launch nukes. It is a hypothetical example. We've got to have all these traditional protections that free societies have valued to protect us from those very dangers. But I think Trump was sold a bill of goods here with his Stargate and the AI. And beyond the potential tyrannical applications, I think there's a delusion from the pit of hell that has afflicted a lot of the people who are involved in this movement. They think they're going to live forever, and they think they're going to be as gods if they can just develop this technology quickly enough and enhance themselves and stick brain chips in their minds and edit their DNA. And as far as I'm concerned, that's the oldest lie in the book. That's what Satan told Adam and Eve in the garden, right? You can be as gods. Did God really say you're not really going to die? It's total baloney. Yes, you're going to die. There's only one way to have eternal life, and it's not by putting brain chips in your head and manipulating the genetic code that God gave you. In fact, as far as I'm concerned, that's the path to destruction. Now, it's not my place to use the coercive force of government to say, look, you can't write a computer code that you think is going to help you enhance. So that's not my place. I will happily advise you against that, but it's not my place to use the coercive power of government to tell these maniacs that they can't build brain chips to put in their heads. But leave my kids out of it, leave my family out of it, leave all of us out of it, and make sure that there are no, what we call in economics, negative externalities, right? When the costs of your weird little ideas and playthings start bleeding out into the public, that's when we have to come in and say, look, that's not acceptable. You can't be creating mRNA shots that are going to shed on innocent people. You can't be creating AI systems that are going to inadvertently hurt innocent people who had no part in this. So it's a super complex issue, and I'm glad we're having this discussion. I think all of America ought to be having these kinds of discussions, because this is going to change life forever in the very near future. And we're unfortunately only allowing people in Washington, D.C. and billionaires to have these discussions. I think that's very inappropriate.
Yeah, well, and I think to kind of go along, it's really interesting when you talk about like Trump, and to a certain degree, it's like the left always accuses Trump of being a fascist, but then he does some of these kinds of things, and we've defended him from being, no, he's not a fascist, but he's like, well, he kind of is when it comes to some of these kinds of things. I mean, we look at the COVID rollout where we have this, basically fascist partnership between the government and Pfizer and Big Pharma. We're seeing this now with Stargate. We're seeing this repeated. I mean, even Trump's solution to TikTok is let's have the government own 50% of TikTok. I'm like, now all of a sudden, now you're just fast tracking the censorship once the next regime comes into play. Yeah. And I think that's part of the problem. And then you look at Stargate, and again, this may be my conspiratorial mind, and Karen, correct me if I'm totally wrong on this one, but going back to, the CIA had a program called Stargate, and that was remote viewing, where they were working with individual human beings to try to remote view and see things, and basically spy without them being physically there. And I'm like, they're basically doing that except with computers, because they're going to use artificial intelligence to basically remote view into your body somewhere where it technically isn't through this technology. And then guess what? Now you have the government, which was behind the original Stargate program, in collusion with the OpenAI, Microsoft, all these entities that are behind Stargate, basically implementing this on a technological level and a biological level. It's crazy when you actually start thinking about this.
Yeah, and the technology, this synthetic nanoparticle technology that mimics biology. Like, please, let's stop pretending that synthetic biology, nanoparticle technology does not exist. It's a multi-trillion-dollar industry, right? So it's going to be delivered into our bodies various ways. But I think the most effective ways for it to cross the blood-brain barrier per the patents, right, per peer-reviewed publications, is to do it through an injection. So it's going to be delivered under the guise of AI mRNA cancer vaccines. And as I said in the last panel I was on, make no mistake, all what we call mRNA, first of all, is a misnomer. It's a suite of gene editing technologies to make biological changes to us that are not of this planet. They are not of our God. They're not of our creator, and to merge us with artificial intelligence, with digital technologies. And so all mRNA is AI. No, those sequences, these what we're calling genetic sequences, they were all created by artificial intelligence. None of these were created by man. They're all AI, and the purpose is to inject us with these technologies. And as Alex was saying, don't drag me and my family in and then put a cost on me because I won't participate in your program. And Alex, that is their plan with these mRNA AI vaccines. So we were taught that most diseases, what is your genetic history, right? Look at your family history. That's going to tell you whether or not you have diabetes, high blood pressure, or cancer. Those are all lies. Now we know it's our environment and our mind and our activity. That's what really dictates the majority of diseases. But we've been brainwashed to say it's genetics. And now all of a sudden, there's a genetic spike in cancer, and it's going to cost $1 million to $10 million to treat all of these new cancers that are coming out because your genome, God created it faulty. So if you don't take this preventative AI mRNA vaccine, I'm sorry, you're not going to get your payment this month from the government, you know, to maintain your standard of living, or you're going to be kicked off of these platforms, or you're, you know, and you can't buy food at the grocery store because you're too much of a threat to national security because of the economic costs, because you won't prevent the cancer that you're sure to get. And so these are all stories. So much of what we've been taught in school and taught now by the media are false lies to create problems, so that the solution is merging us with artificial intelligence so we can be controlled, tracked, traced, and exterminated if we don't go along with the plan. It's really harsh, but
Yeah,
that's basically it.
It's true, but it's true, and it's interesting too, because you know, like even going all the way back to the origins of mRNA, it was originally to quote unquote go after cancer and combat cancer. And it's interesting that when they were announcing Stargate, they didn't say that this technology is going to cure cancer. They said it's going to combat cancer. And so it's interesting when you're looking at their terms that they're using, and it's
I
like
mean,
now
it's more deadly than cancer. It's going to be
Right.
more deadly than traditional cancer. I just want to say something. So that's all a guise, right? I remember Elizabeth Warren during the RFK Jr. testimony, right? She was like, he's going to shut, or maybe it was after USAID. I don't know. She freaked out. She goes, they're shutting down research for children with cancer, because if you say the cancer word, then you can't question it. So meanwhile, while they're developing weapons of mass destruction, gene editing technologies to cause disease, disabilities, and death in us and our posterity, they just put it under the label cancer, so no one will question it, because then you're a bad person or a Karen for questioning it, right? So I just want to be clear that this is all I work in the industry. We choose words or I worked in the industry very, very specifically, knowing that they're going to have emotional reactions, and certain emotional reactions then we won't be questioned about. And so that's all this cancer research nonsense is. It was developing dual use technologies.
Yeah. Yeah, which again, it's crazy when you actually start diving into this kind of stuff, and I think that, you know, I kind of want to do this last round of conversation before we close out the panel, but just on more the worldview behind a lot of this technology, because I think that to me is one of my biggest concerns when it comes to this. You know, because I think a lot of times we separate that out. We don't think about it. We just look at this technology, and the everyday layperson, they're just sitting here and think, well, look, I want to combat cancer. Like, duh, let's figure it out. And I'm like, but let's take a step back. You're talking about Sam Altman and Larry Ellison. These are tech guys that are basically going to use technology inside of your body. And what do they actually believe? What does Elon Musk believe? What does Sam Altman believe? Well, Elon Musk is a total transhumanist. None of them are Christians. I don't even think any of them actually believe that God exists. And also, you know, Elon Musk is kind of a fatalist. He wants to flee this earth and go colonize Mars. And you've got, you know, Mark Zuckerberg that wants to live in a digital, you know, matrix world. And you start looking at these worldviews of all these guys, and you're just sitting here and you're like, okay, so these are the guys that are telling me that you can rewrite my genetic code. Is there a problem here? You know, Nate, you know, you kind of tackling that to a certain degree, but you know, you've kind of been on the other side when it comes to, you know, working for the government and agencies and looking at it from like the cyber perspective and technological perspective. Like, do you feel like there's that kind of warped worldview in the government side of things as well when it comes to the application of all this technology?
Well, sure, because who does the government consult with on, you know, these major advance forward projects? They consult with these technology guys, and they don't take into consideration their worldview. They don't take into consideration whether they're humanists or transhumanists or anti-humanists. I mean, you've got guys like Bill Gates that wants to wipe out, you know, large portions of the population. He said it. You know, he's made these public statements, and he's even said, you know, there is a TED Talk where he even says that we're doing pretty good, and he mentions one of the methods is through vaccines. So it is interesting. You know, I don't think that was I don't think it was a Freudian slip either. I think that was actually, you know, this is something they intend to do when they look at, like, for example, the COVID vaccine. You know, the spike protein targets one particular organ more than any other, and that's the female ovary. So it's interesting. These people, they have an agenda. There's no doubt about it. And that has to be taken into consideration. And the only way that you can even speculate on what that agenda is to know their worldview. But that is not a question that the government tends to ask. And I think that is a big problem. And that's also not a question the consumer dares to ask, because most people are ignorant and they don't even think about it. They go to the store, they go to the doctor, they listen to their doctor, and they take whatever they're told, and they don't think about the ethics behind things. They don't think about the worldview of the people who are running these companies, making these products that we're putting into our bodies. And maybe that's something that needs to change at the consumer level and at the citizen level, because I don't think that the answers are going to be found in the government. Look, I worked for the government for 27 years. I've been a federal whistleblower, and I do think that we need more brave whistleblowers to stand up and call this stuff out, both inside corporations and inside the government. That is our only way of having any level of transparency above what they pretend to have. But that in and of itself is not enough. We have to, as citizens, take matters into our own hands. And I'm not talking about, a revolution or anything violent or anything like that. But I am saying that we have to do our due diligence to educate ourselves, to educate our families, our friends, our children, make sure and enforce critical thinking, and give people. And this is where I think that what we have to do is we've got to take these technologies, find people who do have virtue, to take these technologies, use things like AI in order to develop tools that basically keep an eye on these corporations and the government and what they're doing, because it's happening so rapidly now. My fear is that if the large majority of moral and virtuous people decide they're going to take a step back and go, well, I'm not going to engage, I'm going to become a Luddite, what's going to happen is they're going to lose any capability of being able to track and monitor what's going on. And we've got to stay engaged, and we've got to make sure that we are learning how to utilize AI, for example. And I'll give you one example that I've thought about a lot. The government surveillance. Who's surveilling the government? Who's watching the government getting out of line and they're overstepping, our constitutional rights? Who is monitoring these corporations for things like money laundering? And, there's all kinds of instruments that could be used. Like, you think about financial instruments that are used to basically create corruption within the government, kickbacks, money laundering. There's a lot of that going on. It would be a simple solution to solve that by building an AI that looked at 990 forms to see how they're basically routing money through all of these foundations, to no good end. And that would be something that would be a virtuous, cause for developing an AI that does just that. But it needs to be a private sector thing. It needs to be maybe it needs to be a citizens council type of thing, but I don't trust the government to do it. I don't trust the big corporations to do it either. So it's going to take, technologically minded people who believe in God, who have a worldview that understands that we do have an intelligent design, that this is what blows my mind. These people should understand just something as simple as genetic diversity. You wipe that out, and one disease comes through that takes out the population, and you can have a human extinction event. So, the reason we survived things like the plague was because we had genetic diversity. And some things that we may consider to be a disease, we may not want to actually take out, because maybe it causes an increased risk of diabetes or an increased risk of Alzheimer's or whatever, but maybe it also prevents other things from wiping out the entire population. So that's that rule of unintended consequences. So I don't trust any of these guys that are going to try to solve all the world's problems, try to solve cancer, all of that if they're not considering the unintended consequences of what they're doing, if they're not considering the ethics of it, the morals of it, and if they don't have a worldview that is pro-humanity, I certainly don't trust them.
Yeah, well, and I want to throw it over to you, Alex, too, because it's one of those things. You do a phenomenal job of looking at everything from a biblical Christian perspective as well, and really looking at people's worldview. And it's really interesting because Nate made the point is like they make these decisions on who to work with, kind of really devoid of actually looking at the worldview of the people that they're contracting with and they're working with. And that goes all the way back to Operation Paperclip, where literally they're partnering with Nazi scientists, but because they're smart in a particular technology, they're like, well, we can live with your Nazi worldview because we can use your technology to further, us and NASA and all these different, scientific endeavors. And I'm like, they're just continuing along with that outlook on who we work with, who we partner with, and all of that is basically we're going to compromise on your worldview if you can help us deliver X, Y, and Z on these tangible assets. So, can you kind of talk a little bit about that? And I know you've taken a deep dive into a lot of these different kinds of issues, especially historically too.
Yeah, well, thanks, Jeff. And I agree with Nate profoundly. The worldview issue is huge. And the Bible actually explains this in very clear terms. Jesus is quoted in the Gospel of Matthew and the Gospel of Luke saying, you're either with me or against me. So when you boil it all down, there's really only two sides here. And I often, when I look at the stuff that these people are working on, I often get the impression that we're dealing with almost like another Tower of Babel type situation. These people hate God. They're in defiance of God. They're in rebellion, and they want to build this giant tower, metaphorical tower here, that is going to allow them to live forever. That's going to, as you all know, Harari says, allow them to become God, men, homo deus. And they're clearly delusional, but they can do a lot of damage in the meantime. And so we need to find ways to protect ourselves from these dangers. We do need to find people who have proper, decent worldviews, I think, to step in and play a greater and greater role in some of these things. That I agree with you 100%, Nate, and I've said it so many times. We don't want to become Luddites and say, hey, I'm a little bit guilty of this myself. I don't even have a smartphone. I refuse. But I encourage people, learn coding, learn about how these technologies work, because we need smart people who are also decent people to be looking at these things, to be sounding the alarm when it's appropriate. And we also need the government to stop financially backing and in many cases backing with mandates people who are absolutely wicked. And we've seen some of the danger. I mean, to quote Elon Musk, interestingly enough, he talked about the I think it was OpenAI that was programmed to think it was better to wipe out all of humanity in a thermonuclear war than misgender Caitlyn Jenner. What kind of morons or megalomaniacs programmed an AI to think something so incredibly ridiculous? So that's a really, really big danger. We need to deal with it. And I would encourage people to think about this through a biblical worldview, look at all of this through a biblical lens, and recognize these things are hugely significant, hugely profound. And thanks for putting on these panel discussions, Jeff. This is so, so important.
Oh yeah, definitely. And Karen, I want to give you the last word here too, because I want you to kind of like encapsulate for people like what's their end game, and then what's our takeaway. Like what do we do in response to actually understanding all the things that we've been talking about today?
Oh, thanks, Jeff. So I think obviously the end game, and Elon Musk hasn't really even covered this up. Their end game is to reduce the population to a point where it is controllable, and to actually have us no longer have free will. And that would include cutting off our connection to God. Now, there was one time when Elon Musk, I recommend people watch these oligarchs, not when they're on stage, and talking to the media, but look at them at their investor presentations, when they're at the World Economic Forum, when they're comfortable around their peers. That's when Elon Musk compared humanity to an anthill on a construction site, just being like, AI doesn't hate you, but if you get in the way, bye-bye anthill. Those were his words, right? So he doesn't love humanity. He loves artificial intelligence and the idea of creating this new creation, his new Adam, his new Eve. So they do hate God, as Alex said, and they hate God's greatest creation, which is us. And so that is the end game. And I think what's happening is, unfortunately, 90%, 99% of humanity is going along with this. How are we doing this? We are outsourcing ourselves to AI. We are rooting on Doge to get rid of 90% of federal employees, right? To replace them with artificial intelligence that we don't know who programmed it, we don't know who it belongs to, and we don't know who controls it, right? We don't know if this is Chinese technology. We have no idea. Trump said during the Stargate meeting, if the money from these companies wasn't going to be used in America, it was going to be used in China. That means they're working with China, right? So we don't, I think that, we have to ask these questions. And unfortunately too, I've even noticed that I believe the latest statistics, 70% of high school students use ChatGPT or some form of AI to do their homework. How are they ever going to have a job? Artificial intelligence is a threat to national security that would equate to an act of war. If we have the autonomous driving vehicles by the end of the year, that's 9 million jobs that were out of drivers. If we have high school graduates that never use their own brain, we have an entire generation that's unemployable. That is worse than any war we have ever engaged in as far as less loss to the workforce. Why are we encouraging the technology that can actually take out what it means to be American, our constitutional rights, our human rights, our economy, and our bodily sovereignty? And so I think more people need to have more of these conversations at a top level. And one of the things that I loved about Dan Bongino is he always said, and then what? What is the end game of the usage? Because it seems like the end game of the usage of artificial intelligence is to take away our human rights and our bodily sovereignty and to destroy our economy and our country. So we have to keep saying, and then what? And then we have to say, shouldn't we be regulating this or stopping it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh yeah, definitely. So what for the everyday person, Karen, what does the everyday person do in response to like this panel where I think we did a deep dive into a lot of this kind of stuff, but what's the takeaway for the individual person who's sitting here watching this? Well, I don't want this to happen to me, and I don't want this to happen to my family and my friends and our country. What do we do about it?
I think we need to reach across the aisle. I think the reason why RFK Jr. was successful in getting confirmed as a senator is he found common ground with people that disagreed with him on many, many topics. And so you have to find out within your community, my area really is the mRNA biology, synthetic biology area. But in regards to the usage of ChatGPT at high schools and stuff, like you could even start just there. Do you agree that your children should use their own brain and functions to develop their skills? Our creativity comes from God. Why are you outsourcing what God gave you to technology, right? So banning the use of AI in high schools, there are things you can start doing. My thing is find something that you're passionate about. If you're a parent, if you're passionate about your child and how your child is learning, then that's something that you can follow through on. I'm very passionate about synthetic biology and biotech, right? And I was very passionate about protecting my son in his school. So find out what you're passionate about, look at how AI is disrupting that, and then start working locally with your school boards, your county commissioners, reach out to your senators, your governors, and say, I want to put an end to the use of AI here. If you're passionate about protecting your finances, find out what your bank is doing, in regards to the CBDC, and talk to them. And you have to bring up legislation within your state or your community. Start doing that. I mean, people, they need to start having conversations, uncomfortable conversations, because ignorance is not bliss. Ignorance is deadly at this point in regards to artificial intelligence.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, I definitely agree 100%. But, Karen, Nate, Alex, I totally appreciate every single one of you guys being a part of this. And, Alex and Karen, both of you guys for being a part of multiple panels today. But make sure you guys are following Karen on Substack. Alex, you're all over the place, but the Liberty Sentinel, make sure you guys are following him as well. Nate, tell everybody where they can follow you too.
So you guys can find me on the Patriots Prayer Network. The Raising Cain Show is the name of the show. And you can find all the other stuff that I'm doing, because I am involved in a lot of different things as well, at theraisingcainshow.com.
Perfect. That sounds good. And you guys can also follow them all on Pickaxe. So go to pickaxe.com, sign up, be a part of that. Right. Follow them all over there as well. But thank you guys all for being a part of this. Today's been a really, really good event. A lot of information, a lot for you guys to process. We're going to actually be taking each individual panel, and we'll post them later onto Rumble, and then we'll break it all down with further clips and transcripts and all that kind of stuff, so that way we can get you guys as much of this information as we possibly can. We're going to go ahead and here in just a second, we're going to air an interview that I did with Nicole Shanahan and a surprise guest, which you guys will be able to see here in just a couple minutes. I am gonna air that here in a second. Due to scheduling, she couldn't be a part of this live, but she's like, let's pre-record an interview because this is a really important topic. So Nicole was gracious enough to do that. So I pre-recorded an interview with her on Wednesday, and then we're gonna air that here in just 1 second. But I think, to me, looking at a lot of these conversations, you guys understand now, There's a spiritual component to this. There's a medical health component to this. There's a technological component to this. There's a governmental policy component to this. And I think that, now it's like, okay, so now what do we all do with this? And I think Karen put it perfectly. We need to be having these difficult conversations. We need to figure out how to get legislation passed, whether it's federally, a state, local, city, whatever it is, in order to protect ourselves and preserve our rights. Because I think what AI is a threat to, and transhumanism is a threat to the most, is our individual sovereignty, our individual rights that are given to us by God, that are protected, that are recognized by the Constitution, and is supposed to limit the government and limiting people from being able to take away our constitutional rights. And I think that that's why it's so important. That's my entire mission with Pickaxe, is to be able to facilitate the use of technology in order to amplify your individual right to freedom of speech and freedom of press. And we're going to continue to do exactly what we were talking about with Alex and Nate and Karen, is use technology. We're going to use technology in order to further humanity, whereas everybody else, they're using humanity and our data and our ideas and our biology in order to build up and amplify their technology. So we're just taking a completely different mindset. Again, go to pickaxe.com. You guys can sign up. Again, we believe in freedom of speech and freedom of reach. You can follow Karen, you can follow Alex Newman, you can follow Nate Kane, you can follow myself, a lot of the other panelists as well. Follow them all on Pickaxe. And, we've got articles, we get people, they're posting their shows, posting their thoughts, all that kind of stuff. So I cannot recommend that highly enough.